wild time right now. We'll probably get into a whole bunch of different topics, especially with what's been going on in Washington the last few weeks. I'm sure you're interested in talking about things like that. But why don't you first tell us about your church, the Allendale United Methodist Church?
Yeah, my name is Andy. I've been pastor here for about 5 years. When I arrived at Allendale United Methodist Church, it was slated to close. And the last 5 years, we've taken a rather aggressive approach at standing with people who are in the margins and being the church in a very different way than a lot of people are used to, creating a safe space for those that have been ostracized from other churches. And in doing so, we have more than quadrupled our membership. But more importantly, we have become a real community that is, doing things in the community alongside the community in solidarity.
And Allendale is a part of maybe Northeast St. Pete, roughly North St. Pete. And people driving on, is it 38th Avenue North, will see the signs outside of your church, and they're often thought-provoking. What made you, and even provoking, let's say, sometimes they're very direct. What made you take such a public stance?
I early on saw our marquee as an extension of the pulpit. Only so many people wander into a church on Sunday morning or see what you have to say on social media. I thought there's an important word that needs to be spoken to what's happening in our country, and we have an opportunity to do that through our sign. And so, for example, 2 years ago, we had a sign that said, "White supremacy is the real problem." And we certainly, after we learned that kids were being put in cages, at Christmas time a few years ago, said, it's not possible for us to worship the refugee child in the manger and turn our backs at the children on the border. And things that need to be said that are good news, right? I'm in the business of sharing good news. And if you are marginalized and you are oppressed, then seeing a group of people that are ready to put their life on the line, stand in solidarity with you, is in fact good news.
Our guest is Reverend Andy Oliver. He's the pastor of Allendale United Methodist Church in St. Petersburg. And this is Sean Conan. I'm host of MidPoint Monday on 88.5 FM. It's 12:32 in the afternoon, and we're talking with Reverend Oliver. And if you'd like to ask any questions, give us a call, 813-239-9663. You can email dj@wmnf.org or text 813-433-0885. Well, there is a local controversy that is involved at your church, and that is that you wanted to create a garden to feed people who are hungry in the community, but there have been some complaints by neighbors. And what I'm gathering is that some of these complaints are political, perhaps, that maybe they support a candidate that you wouldn't support. And that's led the city of St. Petersburg to have your church go through the process of amending the exception document to its site plans. So what is this whole process? How did it come about? And what's the process like?
Yeah, we've had a garden for a long time on the interior of our property. We, during the pandemic, saw the need to expand. We have a lot of property on the east side of our property, and we put a garden plot down and immediately had 3 complaints. All 3 houses happen to have Trump flags up. And a lot of other neighbors thought that it was more about that than it was about the garden. We painted the box that the garden was going to go in and made it look nice. And long story short, the city has said that there's nothing wrong with the garden plot itself. They really should have taken us through a variance process. A variance is if you want to do something on your property that every other property around you can do. And so right now, currently, per state law, residential lots can have gardens in their front yard. They could have the exact same plot that we have. But instead, one of the city staff, who I think is being a little overzealous, put us through this long process. It's been going on for almost 9 months. People have conceived and birthed children in the time that we have been fighting for this garden. And so February the 3rd at 1 o'clock at City Hall in St. Petersburg, we are going to be going through a quasi-judicial hearing. People can show up in support in person, or they can write an email to drc@stpete.org to show support. And if people want to learn more about this, they can go to www.allendaleumc.org/garden. But really, we just want to grow food and give it away to people who are hungry. You know, hunger was already a problem before the pandemic hit, and now that the pandemic is here, it has exposed some of the worst of what we are as a community. And this was one way we saw to alleviate it.
Our guest is Reverend Andy Oliver, pastor of Allendale United Methodist Church in St. Petersburg, and you're listening to WMNF Tampa. We can talk, if you'd like to talk more about this community garden that's giving them issues with the city, you can do that by calling 813-239-9663. But right now, I kind of want to turn a little bit to the crazy news that's been happening this month in national politics. There's so much has changed since January 5th. And you mentioned one of your signs was criticizing white supremacy. And then all of a sudden on January 6th at the US Capitol, a lot of us, we couldn't believe our eyes what we were seeing, that Confederates and not neo-Nazis and white supremacists literally tried to stop the election from being finalized, and had an unsuccessful coup attempt, but it could very well have gotten a lot worse than it did. It was horrible. 5 people died, and a policeman was beaten to death with a fire extinguisher, and it's all because of this. A lot of it had to do with this white supremacy. What was your reaction to what was happening in Washington on January 6th?
Yeah, I was absolutely horrified. As I have been listening to people of color, to Black and brown people, many of them weren't surprised, right? A lot of things that people who look like me are surprised about. If we listen to Black and brown people and to the struggle that they face every day in their existence, we're really living in 2 different Americas. And some of the reflection that I've done has been a real disappointment over still seeing a lot of people playing into the both sides fallacy, an argument that Black people and their allies fighting for their existence and to an end to things like police brutality is somehow equivalent to white supremacists trying to overthrow our Capitol. It's a false moral equivalence that's poisoning us, and it's the same forces that were at work in convincing much of the Christian church in Germany, for example, that what was happening to the Jews was necessary. Until we name evil as evil, it's going to have room to operate. And so I think that we can do better as a country moving forward if we really just listen to the experience of Black and brown people, and also have the courage to name and root out forces of white supremacy that are still very active.
Some of the insurrectionists consider themselves part of a Christian movement or support a Christian government. Well, do you agree with that? And what's your reaction to people who have this frame of mind?
White supremacy has long been given a home in American Christianity. I do not believe that what white supremacy is practicing has anything to do with the teachings and life of Jesus, who I follow. And so one of the reasons I think we're in this mess is because a lot of my colleagues who are white have been afraid to name this as evil, even when it's operational within their own congregation. And so when I look at Allendale, we'll use Allendale for an example, a pretty safe and a space that's doing good work. And yet, because of our history and generations of white supremacy being operative at Allendale, we still have to take a genuine look at the ways that systemic racism is still very active in a space like us. In a lot of the progressive movements and work that I do, if we listen to Black and brown people, they'll tell us that, especially in these white dominant progressive movements, white supremacy and racism is still active. If we can't root it out of ourselves, it may not look like ransacking a Capitol, but it is painful and hurtful nonetheless. We have to root it out of ourselves as well as name those more obvious examples.
You know, part of what you're saying is that we just don't recognize it, or we wouldn't even think about it. So for people who are in that boat, who might think, well, I'm not a racist, how would I recognize systemic racism or implicit bias or something like that, that even I hold within myself? How would I recognize that, and what can be done about that?
It involves personal work. So it involves, for me, it has involved attending a lot of trainings. It has involved shifting who I'm listening to, who I'm conversing with. It has involved even the authors that I read. I used to prepare for a sermon, and I would say predominantly most of the people that I was reading were white theologians. Now I'm listening primarily to Black and brown theologians and Black women and people who are immigrants and people who identify as LGBTQ. In reading how they interpret scripture, it has changed the way that I have preached and the way I have led, and the way that we have been as a congregation, that has better informed us to do the personal work. So it's personal responsibility. And then there's a level of organizational responsibility. So as a church, for example, we are going to do a racial audit, to not ask the question, is there racism at Allendale? But we will assume there is, because we're still a white dominant space. And we will listen and come up with solutions to where we see racism even operative in our space. So we have to kind of set the example and lead from the front.
Our guest is Reverend Andy Oliver. He's pastor of Allendale United Methodist Church in St. Petersburg, and this is MidPoint. I'm Sean Canan, and you're listening to 88.5 FM at 1241 in the afternoon. We were talking a second ago about the insurrection at the Capitol, but a week after that, and it's interesting, I saw on Twitter, someone posted 3 photos, and it was like 3 Wednesdays in January. Consecutive Wednesdays were just huge, huge days. A week after that Wednesday, the 6th, was the impeachment of Donald Trump. There was a photo of Nancy Pelosi gaveling gaveling the impeachment, positive impeachment. I'm not sure how you put it. I apologize, but that happened the following Wednesday. So what are your thoughts on Donald Trump being impeached for the crime, or, being charged with inciting an insurrection?
I think he absolutely needs to be held accountable. In Donald Trump, we saw the worst of who we are as a country, and many of us gave him a megaphone. And it brought to the surface the hatred and the bigotry that's still very much present in a lot of our people. And Trump was a mastermind at using fear to manipulate the masses, and it will happen again. I think it's really important that we hold him accountable. I also hope that it doesn't consume our focus. There's a lot of important work that we need to do. And, I think part of the right strategy, not just on a federal level, but I think on a state level, is sometimes I think they pass things or do things to distract us from the real work that's important. And so I hope we're able to hold those two things in tension.
And the third Wednesday was last Wednesday, in which Donald Trump leaves the White House in the morning, and then just before noon, you have a new president, a new vice president, and the new vice president is a person of color, is a person from South Asia, and is a woman. And I'm sure you have some thoughts about the relevance of all of those things.
Yeah, I think we're in a new day. I'm certainly excited about the Biden-Harris, presidency, but I really hope that we learn from the mistakes of our past. As Biden talks about wanting to have unity, in the past, a lot of times unity has meant telling those who are on the margins, who are being oppressed, to be quiet for the good of the whole. And so I hope we're able to see a different way that unity can be forged, and that's when it's coupled with justice. We can't have true unity or true peace unless there is justice that's present. And so I'm very excited, of course, for Vice President Kamala Harris and for Biden. I think for me, the highlight, though, of the inauguration was listening to poet Amanda Borman, Amanda, Amanda Gorman give that beautiful poem that I think named who we are, honestly. It named who we have been and who we could be into the future. Her poem ended with, the new dawn blooms as we free it, for there is always light, if only we're brave enough to see it, if only we're brave enough to be it. And I think that was a real call for all of us to step up, and to step into the future that we could have in the world as it could be.
Our guest is the pastor of Allendale United Methodist Church in St. Petersburg, Reverend Andy Oliver. And if you'd like to join the conversation, give us a call at 813-239-9663. You can email dj@wmnf.org, or you can text 813-433-0885. We've had Rob from Thinota Sassa hanging on for a long time, so why don't we go to the phones, Reverend Oliver, if you don't mind. And Rob, what would you like to say, Rob?
Hi, Sean. Reverend Oliver. I'd like you, if you could address this this idea I have, which is, I'm sure you're familiar with the book that's been out a long time, When Bad Things Happen to Good People. But what about the idea I've had that when good people think or do bad things, the demonization, you sort of see on both sides, but certainly on the right, that the liberals are evil, Nancy Pelosi is a monster, Chuck Schumer is Darth Vader, and similar things. Now, I know for a fact that the people who sort of download these mental viruses into their mind are not bad people. Very few people do things that they think are actually bad, even when, with a little reflection, we realize later they are. Germany, not every German was a monster. In Rwanda, those people who did horrible things were actually probably okay people other than that incident. So could you please address that so that we can not demonize the individual while certainly condemning the actions?
Thank you, Rob.
Yeah, absolutely. As a pastor, I believe in transformation, and I think I got to stand up for Darth Vader. We remember in the end he was transformed, and
Spoiler alert.
But I think it's also important. One of my jobs also is to name evil. As a pastor, it's what Jesus did. Jesus named what was evil. And you're right, there is always potential for people to transform. I have to recognize the own harm and evil that is operative within me, and root that out and be better. I still make mistakes as a pastor. I made a mistake a few weeks ago in worship. Something happened in our worship service that did harm to a lot of Black and brown people. And when it was brought to my attention, it wasn't my intention, but the impact did harm. And so the following Sunday, I publicly named it in myself and took responsibility for it and apologized. But I think we also have to name that to simply respond to a situation by saying there are good people on both sides, which we've heard come out of our former president's mouth, and other things also falls short. But no, I'm not interested in demonizing, but holding that intention with naming evil is crucial and important. If someone comes to Allendale that doesn't maybe ascribe to all our beliefs, which happens. In fact, a lot of the people who were here when I arrived, this was not their ball of wax at all, not their interest. I spend more time with those people so that we can struggle together. It's what Jesus did. Again, Jesus struggled with people who were struggling to work it out. And if they're willing to stay and to work it out, as long as they're not doing harm to people, this is going to be a space for them. And but as a shepherd, I also have responsibility that if harm is being done, to step in and stop it. So I think both of those things can be true. It doesn't have to be an either or.
If I could just add very, very briefly, in the New Testament, Paul has a prescription for that, and that is if someone acts in ways that are harmful or non-Christian, they may be sort of banned from the congregation, but when they come back and they are, basically reject those views, they're embraced back into the congregation. And I think largely that's maybe the best way to look at it, because when you tell someone that they're no good or they're evil or they're despicable, I think it's harder for that person to rehabilitate themselves, as you were suggesting.
Rob, thanks for making those points. I'll let Reverend Oliver respond, but then we're going to move on. But thank you for calling, Rob.
Yeah, if I went back in time and had a conversation with Andy 10, 20 years ago, there's a lot of things that I would have a problem with, right, in my own self. We're all on a journey. And I think as long as we are intent on moving forward and learning, that there needs to be great space for that. So I appreciate your comment.
All right, thanks for that call, Rob. And I want to read a quick email from Marley. She writes, I'm just wondering if a public comment is required if I attend the garden hearing at City Hall, and if so, any recommendations on what to say. So this is Marley asking about the controversy with the garden. So maybe remind people who have just tuned in again what this.
Yeah, so we're fighting a battle with the city of St. Petersburg over the right to have a simple vegetable garden to grow food to feed hungry people. And there's a hearing at City Hall at 1 o'clock on February 3rd. And we would love for people to come and give public comment. You have about 3 minutes. If you want some of the facts and background on the garden, if you go to allendaleumc.org/garden, we have some information there. But you could simply just come and talk about the importance of gardening for the environment, or the the importance of feeding those who are hungry. When we say we're all in this together, we need to act like it. And this is one way that we act like it. So yes, we would love for people to come and give public comment or to write an email.
Well, thanks for that question, Marley. And also Peggy writes in and she likes our guests. So thank you for that comment. We appreciate that. Let's take a question from Mark in Tampa. Hi, Mark, you're on the air. What would you like to say? You there, Mark? I'm going to put you on hold and we'll get back to you if we can, but we'll go right now to Chris in Clearwater. Hi, Chris.
Hi, I want to compliment you on starting a garden. I just don't see nearly enough of them around the county here in Pinellas since COVID got started. And, people ought to be wanting to not just cut down on their food bills, but also have fresh picked energy. The fresher the pick, the more spiritually uplifting the energy of the food's going to be. And my question I wanted to ask is about, aren't you concerned about illegal aliens bringing in COVID or tuberculosis or any other disease?
Yeah, thank you for that. So I think first that I would hesitate based on the relationships I have with people who are undocumented. They find it really hurtful when the word alien is used or illegal. So I think there's a way for us to speak that honors who they are in naming them, certainly as undocumented or just as people. But, as far as, this pandemic, the pandemic doesn't recognize borders. That's something, when God looks at our planet, right? God doesn't see borders. That's something that we've constructed. And so I think as a faith community and as a pastor, my focus and emphasis is on how can we love our neighbor in this moment? And our neighbor is our immigrant neighbor, right? And so I want to be about the work of offering love and support for all people, especially those that are on the margins, like someone that might be an immigrant. And if anything, the numbers show that they should be more concerned about people from the United States traveling there rather than the opposite way. But I thank you for your call.
Yeah, Chris, thanks for the call. I appreciate that. Call again, please. And I'm going to give out the number because there are a couple of open lines, 813-239-9663. You can email dj@wmnf.org or text 813-433-0885. Our guest is Reverend Andy Oliver. He's pastor of Allendale United Methodist Church in St. Pete. This is MidPoint. I'm Sean Canan, and we're taking your calls to the end of the hour. We could talk, Reverend Oliver, about the COVID-19 crisis. What does that mean for your community or for our community in general in Tampa Bay? What words would you say for people who are dealing with this economic and health crisis?
When the pandemic hit, we immediately shut down our property. And we have been worshiping online, live stream on Sunday mornings at 10:30. And we will continue that practice until we feel like it's safe to open. We have reopened part of our property because there are a number of AA groups that got, Alcoholics Anonymous groups that got kicked out of their properties that they were meeting at. And we felt like that was essential for people during this pandemic that needed support around a drinking problem, to be able to have a community still. And so we've allowed for that and have protocols in place to keep everyone safe. But looking at COVID on a statewide level, I think we have to name that Governor DeSantis and many of the Florida GOP electeds, they're directly responsible for the number of deaths that that have tragically happened in our state. And it's state-sponsored killing because of the incompetence that they have shown. When we could have had a mask mandate or very clear leadership at the top that could have saved so many lives. I've done several funerals. I've held people who are just devastated at the loss of a loved one. We've got to get together as a state. I'm really proud of the way that our community has responded. I think that St. Pete and Tampa both have done a pretty good job. We still have pockets that, are I saw out there celebrating the Bucks headed to the Super Bowl, unmasked. And I think wearing a mask saves lives. And, it really hurts me when I see people not following that because it's just so important right now that we protect one another.
And Trudy from Brandon writes in and says she kind of agrees with what you're saying. She says that I think there will be a spike in Tampa as a result of yesterday's Bucks win and all those people celebrating without masks last night. So I hope you're wrong, Trudy and Reverend Oliver, but I think that that's a kind of a logical conclusion for people to draw. And also with the big Super Bowl coming and not as many fans as normal, but people will be traveling to